He told detectives, "I took care of her." Yet inside his home, they found walls lined with leaves and a child bound in the basement. What drove Matthew Hoffman to transform an ordinary house into a living tomb? And where were the others? The house was quiet. Too quiet. A low, unnatural stillness pressed against the walls. Light from a single bathroom bulb spilled into the darkened hallway, pooling faintly across the carpet. The air was heavy, dense, carrying the unmistakable scent of blood. Thick, metallic, sharp enough to catch in the throat. Valerie Hawthorne's hands trembled as she stepped through the open window. The glass had slid aside with eerie ease. She had told herself this was only a precaution. Tina might have been sick. Maybe she had left in a hurry. But now, her breath caught. Her pulse pounded against her ribs. Then she saw it. A smear of deep red stained the pale carpet, dragged in jagged strokes down the narrow hallway. Drops had spattered the baseboards. High up on the bathroom wall, fine sprays of crimson traced a frantic pattern. The bathroom itself, the floor, soaked. Pools of blood thickened in the grout lines. Something had happened here. Something brutal. A soft gasp escaped her lips, strangled mid-breath. No sign of Tina. No sign of the children. No voice answering her trembling calls. Only silence. And that smell. God, the smell. Valerie stumbled back out into the daylight. Her fingers fumbled to dial. The words tumbled, broken, into the dispatcher's ear. Blood. Everywhere. I do not know what happened. By the time deputies arrived, the scene was sealed. What they found confirmed the worst fears. There had been violence. Overwhelming, ferocious violence. Blood in the living room, in the bathroom, at the top of the basement stairs. Drag marks led toward the basement door. Yet, no bodies. No Tina Herrmann. No Sarah. No Cody. No Stephanie Sprang. And even the family dog Tanner was missing. For a seasoned investigator, the scene raised immediate questions. This was not a spontaneous act of rage. Not entirely. There were signs of premeditation, yet also chaos. A conflict between impulse and planning. Whoever had done this had moved quickly, decisively, but had also left behind this grim evidence of struggle. The absence of the bodies suggested transportation. A vehicle must have been involved. But more than that, it indicated control. The perpetrator had managed to subdue multiple victims, eliminate resistance, and remove them. All without drawing the attention of neighbors in this quiet suburban enclave. Such control points to a certain type of offender. Not a career criminal, perhaps. More likely, someone driven by obsession. Someone operating from an inner compulsion that had built slowly, dangerously, until it broke free. As the initial investigation unfolded, suspicion first fell on Gregory Borders, Tina's estranged boyfriend. A common starting point. Intimate partners account for the majority of such crimes. But Borders had an alibi, confirmed and verifiable. Attention then turned outward. A broader canvas, surveillance checks, digital footprints. That was when they found it. A receipt. Simple. Innocuous at first glance. A purchase from Walmart. Heavy-duty trash bags. 2 tarps. Dated just hours before the killings. The implications were chilling. Here was premeditation. Clear intent to conceal. The killer had planned, at least in part, for what would come. Yet, something had gone awry. The sheer volume of blood suggested that events had spiraled out of control. In the mind of such an offender, this is often the moment when fantasy collides with reality. The act itself does not unfold as imagined. The victims resist. Chaos intrudes. The killer is forced to improvise, to adapt, leading to escalating violence. And afterward, panic sets in. The need to hide evidence, to restore a sense of control. Forensic psychology recognizes this arc well. Fantasy, compulsion, act, disorganization, concealment. It is a pattern seen in offenders who straddle the line between calculated predator and disorganized compulsive. Yet, one element remained profoundly disturbing. The scene bore no sign of forced entry. Tina's home had not been broken into, which raised a darker possibility. Had the killer been watching, waiting? Had he slipped inside before the victims returned? As detectives reconstructed the timeline, another unsettling fact emerged. Tina's vehicle was later found abandoned at a nearby college parking lot, a staged disposal designed to mislead. Another sign of a calculating mind, struggling to maintain control even as the situation unraveled. What kind of person does this? What drives a man to plan such horror, to execute it, and then to vanish, leaving behind only blood and silence? In the days to come, investigators would pull at this thread. They would trace the receipt, review surveillance, and in doing so, they would uncover a far stranger mind than anyone could have imagined. A mind haunted by leaves, by rituals, by obsessions rooted in childhood wounds and spiraling into madness. But that revelation would come later. The receipt led them forward. It was a small clue, buried in the clutter of that broken home. A slip of paper, a timestamp, heavy-duty trash bags, 2 tarps, a turkey sandwich, a shirt. The purchase had been made just after midnight, hours before the bloodshed. Investigators followed the trail to a Walmart in Mount Vernon. They pulled surveillance footage. For long minutes, the video played, frame after frame. Shoppers drifted in and out of view. Then, there he was, a man in a camouflage jacket, glasses, moving with quiet purpose through the store. Not hurried, not nervous, focused. At the register, he paid in cash. No words, no wasted motion. Then he left, walking calmly to a silver Toyota Yaris. The image was clear enough. They traced the vehicle registration to Matthew Hoffman. The name meant little at first. Just another resident, living less than 10 miles from Tina's house. But as they dug deeper, a pattern began to emerge. Hoffman had a record: arson, assault, domestic violence, a troubled past marked by isolation and escalating aggression. Recently fired from his job as a tree trimmer, a life unraveling. More troubling still, officers learned that Hoffman had been stopped by chance near the college parking lot where Tina's vehicle was abandoned. The timing was no coincidence. The pieces fit too neatly. This was their man. By the 3rd day, a search warrant was secured. The plan was deliberate. No knock, no warning. The team moved in at dawn, a cold November sky pressing low overhead. The house stood silent on Columbus Road, modest, unremarkable. But inside, a different world waited. The door crashed open beneath the battering ram. A flash grenade thumped, its sound muffled by the leaves. Officers swept the rooms, weapons drawn. What they found defied expectation. Leaves, piled deep across the living room floor, bagged and stacked along the walls, pressed into corners. The house smelled of earth, of decay. In the kitchen, more leaves. In the bathroom, they lined the floor and walls. The scent was overpowering, strange, almost ritualistic. Then, the basement. A cabinet had been wedged against the door. It took force to move it. When they descended, flashlights caught the shapes first, bags of leaves, and there, amid them, a small form. Sarah Maynard, 13 years old, bound with rope and duct tape. Alive. She blinked against the light, disoriented. Her voice was thin, uncertain. She asked about school, about her dog. Her words did not match the horror around her. Shock had wrapped her in a fragile haze. As they carried her to safety, the house remained. Quiet, watchful, no sign of Tina, no sign of Cody, no trace of Stephanie. In the mind of the profiler, the scene spoke volumes. The leaves were no accident. They were an obsession, a compulsion, a symbol of control in a world that had spun beyond the offender's grasp. Hoffman had filled his space with them, perhaps seeking comfort, perhaps enacting a ritual known only to him. The presence of Sarah, kept alive among the leaves, hinted at something deeper, a fractured morality, a desire to possess, not merely to destroy. It was a chilling portrait a mind split between savage violence and distorted caretaking. But the most pressing question remained unanswered. Where were the others? That question would soon take the investigation into darker depths still. The search for truth and for the lost was only beginning. Matthew Hoffman sat alone in the small interrogation room. The walls were bare, the table cold beneath his hands. A camera watched from the corner, its lens steady, silent. He had said little since his arrest. His face remained expressionless, his eyes downcast. Detectives entered quietly, placing a folder on the table. They began with simple questions about his day, about the house, about Sarah. At first, he offered nothing, not even a glance. His breathing was slow, measured, a man retreating deep inside himself. But silence can speak. It can press against the edges of a room, draw out the waiting. One of the detectives shifted his tone, spoke gently as though to a wounded child. They asked again, where were Tina, Cody, Stephanie? A long pause followed. Then, a flicker, a small movement of his hands beneath the table, fingers tracing circles on his palm, a subtle sign of tension. Finally, his voice broke the stillness, barely above a whisper. I must have done something wrong. I found her in my house. I took care of her. He spoke of Sarah, of feeding her, letting her watch a movie, a book he had given her. His words seemed rehearsed, as if clinging to a single thread of decency in an ocean of darkness. But when asked again about the others, his gaze drifted. He claimed not to remember. The same phrases repeated. I do not know. I do not remember. It is a familiar pattern in cases like this. A mind fractured by compulsion, attempting to separate itself from its own actions. At times, genuine dissociation. At others, a calculated defense. Hoffman wavered between the two, moments of childlike confusion, followed by glimpses of cold awareness. Then came the dream. He spoke suddenly of a food processing plant, of bags and something terrible inside them. The story was disjointed, surreal, a strange narrative that hinted at deeper knowledge and deeper denial. The detectives listened. They pressed, but gently. They understood the fragile state before them. Pushing too hard would risk collapse, too soft, and the truth would drift further away. Over the hours, they changed tactics. One detective stepped out. Another took a seat beside him. The tone became softer still, more human. They spoke of loneliness, of the burden of secrets. They reminded him the families deserved answers. And there, in that quiet space, something shifted again. Hoffman's posture changed. His shoulders lowered, his hands stilled. I can show you, he said. The place. The words hung in the air, heavy, final. No celebration followed, no relief. The room remained thick with what was to come. They prepared carefully. The next morning, beneath a sky pale with mist, they drove with him. A small convoy moving slowly through the back roads of Knox County. Hoffman sat in the back seat, his gaze flickering to the passing trees, his voice silent once more. As they approached the Kokosing Wildlife Area, the car grew quieter still. The landscape around them thickened, trees rising dense on either side. There, he murmured. He led them into the woods. The path was rough, tangled with roots and brush, the air cold against the skin. Then, the tree, a large beech, hollowed with age. At first glance, it seemed a relic of the forest, but as they drew closer, a faint odor met them. Faint, but unmistakable. Inside, beneath layers of leaves and carefully packed bags, they found them. Tina, Cody, Stephanie, and Tanner. The scene was unspeakably sad. The bodies placed with deliberate care, hidden within the tree's hollow core. In that moment, the profiler's mind turned again to Hoffman's ritual. The leaves, the tree, the need to bury what he could not face. It was more than concealment, it was something deeper. An attempt to reclaim control, to rewrite the chaos of his own actions. Such behavior is not uncommon in offenders driven by compulsion. The act itself rarely brings peace. Instead, it creates new fractures, new obsessions. As the recovery teams worked in solemn silence, Hoffman stood nearby, watching, his face unreadable. The answers had come, but the why, the true why, remained buried still, and perhaps always would. When the final body was lifted from the hollow tree, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The stillness was profound, heavy. Even the wind through the branches seemed muted, as though nature itself recoiled from what had been done here. The team worked with slow, deliberate care. No voice rose above a whisper. The bags were unsealed, each movement precise, each discovery met with silent acknowledgement. There was no victory in that place, no sense of justice fulfilled, only grief, and questions that no confession could fully answer. Hoffman had said little on the return drive. His gaze remained distant, eyes fixed on a point far beyond the passing landscape. The officers beside him did not press. There was nothing more to ask. The bodies had been found. The nightmare laid bare. In the days that followed, the community struggled to comprehend what had unfolded in their midst. Apple Valley, a town of quiet streets and familiar faces, had become the backdrop to something monstrous. Fear lingered in every conversation, in every glance, and beneath it all, the question remained. Why? The psychological profile of Matthew Hoffman grew clearer with each layer uncovered. He had not entered Tina's home that day with the sole intent to kill. His initial plan, if such it could be called, had been burglary. A return to the compulsive behaviors that had long plagued him. He had been watching the house, from the woods across the street, sleeping beneath the trees, an image that still chills to consider. Night after night, observing, waiting for the right moment. But something had broken when Tina and Stephanie returned unexpectedly. The fragile boundary between Hoffman's fantasies and reality had collapsed. Panic surged, violence followed. In forensic terms, this is known as an impulsive escalation, a crime of opportunity turned catastrophic through the unstable lens of a disordered mind. Yet it was what followed that spoke loudest to his pathology. The leaves. The house transformed into a strange earthen tomb. The meticulous packing of bodies into the hollow tree. These were not random acts. They were rituals of control, acts of psychological containment. Hoffman's obsession with leaves likely had deep roots, symbolic, perhaps linked to childhood trauma, the loss of his father, the need to create order from decay, to mask the horror with the detritus of nature. Within the mind of such an offender, ritual provides solace, a grim comfort. By surrounding himself with the familiar, the obsessive, Hoffman sought to reclaim a shattered sense of self. Even his treatment of Sarah reflected this fracture. She was not spared from harm, but was not discarded. Instead, she was kept, watched over in a way that mirrored his need for possession, for control. Such dichotomies are common in severely disordered offenders, a capacity for extreme violence, paired with moments of distorted caretaking. The line between predator and guardian blurred beyond recognition. In the courtroom, Hoffman showed little emotion. His plea agreement spared him the death penalty, condemning him instead to life without parole. But for the families, and for those of us who study such darkness, no sentence could truly contain the echoes of this crime. There are wounds that linger beyond the physical, questions that may never be fully answered. Why the leaves? Why the tree? Why Sarah spared and the others not? In truth, only Hoffman knows, and perhaps even he does not understand the full depth of what drove him. That is the nature of such minds, to walk a path shaped by obsession, by compulsion, by wounds unseen. And in the quiet that follows such a case, one truth remains. Evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it waits, beneath the leaves, in the shadows. in the spaces where no one thinks to look, until it is too late. In the months that followed, the case settled into the cold corridors of the justice system. The media faded. Headlines moved on. Yet for those who had walked through that house, through that forest, the images remained. Fixed, inescapable. I have studied many such cases, yet this one lingers. There is something about the quiet horror of it. The way the violence erupted in an ordinary home. The way the ritual followed. Leaves and silence and shadows. A man whose life had narrowed to obsession, whose mind fractured along lines no one could see. Matthew Hoffman pled guilty to 10 felonies: murder, kidnapping, burglary, abuse of a corpse. The plea spared him the needle, but not the cell. He will never walk free again. In the courtroom, he spoke few words. His voice was flat, detached, not cold, not warm, simply empty. It is that emptiness that haunts me most. I have seen remorse, rage, defiance, fear, but in Hoffman, none of these lived. Only that strange vacancy, as though he had sealed some part of himself away, behind walls no sentence could breach. For the families of Tina, Cody, Stephanie, and for Sarah, the road ahead would be long. Grief does not follow a straight path, nor does healing. Sarah survived, by chance, by will, perhaps both. In time, I hope she forgets the smell of those leaves, the darkness of that basement, the weight of rope on her skin. But such memories run deep. When I teach now, when I speak of this case, I tell my students, look beyond the act, beyond the blood. Study the mind, for it is there, in the unseen places, that the true horror resides. Hoffman was not a monster born of nothing. He was a man shaped by wounds, by loss, by choices made and unmade. The leaves, the tree, the rituals, they were not madness alone. They were meaning, twisted, broken, but meaning nonetheless. We must remember that, not to excuse, never to excuse, but to understand, for only through understanding can we hope to see and to stop the next shadow that moves unseen among us. I think often of that house, of that forest, and of the silence that followed. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear it.